Okay, so picture this. It's the late 1960s, and rock music is just exploding. It's getting louder, weirder, more psychedelic. But in the middle of all that, one group decides to go in the complete opposite direction. They looked backwards, digging deep into the roots of American music to create something that sounded, ancient and brand new all at once. They were called The Band, and their story is this incredible look at rebellion, collaboration, and, really, the soul of North American music. And get this, the person who said that, it wasn't just some critic. We're talking about Eric Clapton. At the time, he was basically a guitar god in the supergroup Cream, and he said hearing the band's debut album made him want to quit his own band. That's how deep their impact was right out of the gate. They weren't just playing songs, they were making their peers completely rethink what rock and roll could even be. So here's our roadmap for their amazing journey. We're going to start with how they totally rebelled against the sound of their time, then get into their fiery origins, their big creative breakthrough in a basement in Woodstock, and how they basically built the entire genre of Americana. From there, we'll look at their legendary farewell and the bitter feud that came with it before we wrap it all up with their legacy, which is still going strong. To really get the band, you've got to understand the world they walked into. We're talking 1967, the summer of love. Music was all about fuzzy guitars, trippy lyrics, and wild studio experiments. But the band, they took a hard left turn. They looked to the past, to old school country, blues, gospel, and folk to build their sound from the ground up. And that back to the land idea, that's the whole key right there. While everyone else was blasting off into the electric future, the band was making music that felt earthy, organic, like it was pulled right out of the soil. In its own way, it was a seriously radical move, just a much quieter one. But a sound like that doesn't just appear out of thin air, right? It was hammered into shape in two really intense places. First, a grueling apprenticeship in the wild world of rockabilly, and second, on what might be one of the most hostile world tours in the history of music. All right, so let's meet the guys who made it all happen. And what's so wild is the mix. You've got 4 Canadians and 1 lone Southerner from the Arkansas Delta, Levon Helm. That combination, that was their secret sauce. Levon brought that authentic, swampy Southern rhythm, and the Canadians brought all their own different influences. The result was a sound that was uniquely North American, not just American. Before they were the band, they were paying their dues as the Hawks, backing up this crazy rockabilly frontman named Ronnie Hawkins. And I mean, they were paying their dues. Hawkins ran a tight ship. It was basically a rockabilly boot camp, where he demanded perfection and insane energy every single night. That pressure cooker is what turned them into this unbelievably tight musical machine. So after they split from Hawkins, they get this huge gig, backing up Bob Dylan. But this was the tour, the one where Dylan decided to go electric. And let me tell you, the folk purist audiences were not having it. They felt totally betrayed, and this one word, Judas, just screamed from the crowd in Manchester. Well, it became the symbol for the kind of hate they faced night after night. And this was their trial by fire. Instead of backing down, Dylan just turns to them and gives this now legendary order. Getting booed every single night forced them to lock in with each other, to create this kind of musical telepathy and a toughness that would define them for the rest of their careers. Okay, so after all that chaos on the Dylan tour, the guys just needed to escape. They had to get away from the pressure, the booing, all of it. So they moved to this quiet little spot in upstate New York, not far from where Dylan was recovering from a motorcycle crash. And it was there, in this kind of rundown house with pink siding, that they finally found their own voice. I mean, look at the difference here. It's like night and day, right? They went from all that hostility and high decibel pressure of the tour to a world of friendship and total creative freedom. The basement of that house, which they called Big Pink, it wasn't just a studio. It was their clubhouse, their laboratory, with zero expectations from the outside world. And boy, did they get productive. Down in that basement, they laid down over 100 songs with Dylan, a wild mix of old folk tunes, covers, and brand new songs. These recordings, which became legendary as the basement tapes, that's where the signature sound of the band was really born. It's relaxed, it's communal, and it's just so deeply rooted. So now, with this new sound fully baked, they were ready to step out of that basement and into the spotlight. And what came next were 2 of the most important albums in rock history, records that literally wrote the playbook for a whole new genre of music. So what even is Americana? Well, think of it like this.
It's this amazing stew of all the musical traditions that have been bubbling up across the continent for 100 years. The band were just masters at grabbing these different ingredients, a little blues here, some country there, a dash of gospel, and cooking it all up into something that felt totally timeless, but also completely new. Their first album, Music from Big Pink, it just sounds like an old, faded photograph, you know? It established that earthy, sepia-toned vibe. Then, a year later, their self-titled record, which everyone calls the Brown Album, took things to another level. It was like a history book set to music, with songs about the Civil War, struggling farmers, and union workers. It was this rich, incredible portrait of American life. And a huge piece of this magic, maybe the biggest piece, was the vocal alchemy. They didn't just have one lead singer. They had three killers. You had Levon's gritty, southern roar, Richard's incredibly soulful and often heartbreaking voice, and Rick's sweet, soaring tenor. They would pass verses back and forth and weave these harmonies that made them sound less like a band and more like a family. It was a true community of voices. But you know, that kind of magic, that communal spirit, it's a hard thing to hold on to. The pressures of being famous, drugs, and arguments over who was writing what, it all started to pull the group apart. And it led to one of the most famous goodbyes in music history, and a feud that would simmer for decades. So Robbie Robertson, he gets this idea. He's worried the band's going to burn out on the road. So he says, let's go out with a bang. And he plans the Last Waltz. This wasn't just another gig. It was a full-blown cinematic event on Thanksgiving Day, with a ton of famous guests, all directed by Martin Scorsese. It was meant to be their final, definitive statement. But underneath all that celebration, there was this massive crack forming. And it was mostly between Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm. Robbie, who had most of the songwriting credits, basically felt he'd picked up the slack and earned the royalties. But Levon saw it differently. He argued the songs came from the whole band's chemistry, from the groove, and that everyone should share in the profits. It was that classic, heartbreaking fight over art versus money. And the years that followed, well, they were just full of heartbreak. The band did get back together without Robbie, but losing Richard Manuel in 1986 was a blow they never really recovered from. And over the decades, we lost them all. Rick in '99, then Levon in 2012, Robbie Robertson, the group's great storyteller, passed away in 2023. And with the passing of the musical genius Garth Hudson, the final chapter of the band was closed. So, after all that, the breakup, the feud, the tragedies, what's left? Well, what's left is a legacy that's maybe more powerful and influential now than it's ever been. The band didn't just make a few great albums. They literally laid the groundwork for an entire musical movement that's still thriving today. I mean, their fingerprints are just everywhere. That back-to-basics vibe inspired giants like the Beatles and the Grateful Dead to strip their own sound down. And today, you can't find an artist in the whole Americana world, from Wilco to Brandi Carlile, who doesn't owe a massive debt to the sound of the band cooked up in that Woodstock basement. When you boil it all down, they did so much more than just write great songs. They created what you could call a sonic novel, telling these incredible stories of a forgotten America and proving, maybe more than any band ever, that 5 people working together as one could create something so much bigger and more beautiful than any of them could have on their own. And that really leaves us with this one big question, doesn't it? The band story is one of both brilliant, beautiful creation and this really bitter division. So what lasts longer? Is it the perfect harmony they found on songs like The Wait, or is it the conflict that eventually broke them up? That's something worth thinking about long after the music fades out.